If you are enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is James Hawthorne, but everyone calls me Jimmy. I've been a ranger here in the Bridger-Teton National Forest for almost 15 years now, and what I'm about to tell you happened during the fall of 1963. It's a story I've tried to forget, but some things just stick with you, like the scar on my left cheek from Korea or the weight of my brother's silver compass in my pocket. I was known as the best tracker in these parts. Give me a broken twig and some disturbed leaves, and I could tell you what passed through and when. But nothing in my years as a ranger, or even my time as a medic in Korea, could have prepared me for what happened up in the high country that November. I was stationed at the Fire Lookout Tower near Shadow Lake, way up at 9,800 feet. It's beautiful country up there, or at least it was. The tower stood like a lonely soldier against the sky, overlooking ancient Native American hunting grounds. The local tribes used to tell stories about those grounds, about hunger spirits that could possess people. I never paid much attention to those tales. Should have. Maybe. The air was different that fall. Anyone who spent time in the wilderness knows how it feels just before the first snow. There's a certain stillness, a waiting. But this was different. The elk were moving in ways I'd never seen, heading down the mountains weeks early. Then came the dead birds, dropping from the sky like rain. No explanation, just dozens of them falling dead right out of the clear blue. I remember standing on the tower's observation deck, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The wind was picking up, and the temperature was dropping faster than usual. That's when the radio crackled to life with news about 3 missing hunters. I didn't know it then, but that call was the beginning of the worst week of my life. Let me tell you what happened up there in the high country, but I warn you, some stories are better left untold. This is one of them. It all started when I got that radio call about 3 missing hunters. They'd been gone for 2 days, which isn't usually cause for panic up here. But something felt off about this one. Their last radio message mentioned strange howling, not like wolves or any animal I knew. And the way they described it, their voices shaking. Well, it made the hair on my neck stand up. I grabbed my gear and headed out at first light. The morning was unusually cold, the kind that bites at your face and makes your breath come out like smoke. As I followed their last known trail, I noticed something weird. The animals were gone. Usually you'd hear squirrels chattering or birds calling, but there was nothing, just silence. Then I found the tracks. Now, I've tracked every animal in these mountains, but these were different. They looked almost like elk prints, but wrong, like the animal was walking on 2 legs. And they were huge, deeper than they should be, as if whatever made them was incredibly heavy. As I followed the tracks, I started noticing trees with strange symbols carved into them. They looked old, but I knew these trails like the back of my hand, and I'd never seen them before. They reminded me of the native warnings I'd seen in old books, the ones about evil spirits. That's when I found the deer. It was wrong. The poor thing hadn't been torn apart like a normal predator kill. It looked like something had carefully removed its organs, almost surgically. The meat around the ribs was eaten, but not ripped or torn. It was like someone had cut it away with a knife. The temperature kept dropping. My thermometer showed it was way below normal for this time of year. My radio started acting up too, giving off nothing but static. I tried calling back to base, but all I got was this weird, high-pitched sound that made my teeth hurt. As the day went on, the sky got darker and darker. Not like normal clouds coming in, but something else. And that's when I heard it, the howling the hunters had talked about. It sounded almost human, but not quite. Like someone trying to copy a person's voice but getting it just wrong enough to make your skin crawl. I knew I should head back to the tower. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there. But those hunters were still missing, and finding people is my job. So I kept going, even as the wind picked up and the first snowflakes started to fall. I didn't know it then, but I was walking straight into a nightmare, and somewhere out there in the growing darkness, something was watching me. I'll never forget what I found as the day got darker. The snow was starting to fall harder when I spotted something in the distance, something that shouldn't have been there. It was a person, standing completely still in the snow. As I got closer, my heart nearly stopped. It was the first hunter, but he was frozen solid. His eyes were wide open, and his hands, God, his hands showed he'd tried to eat himself. I'd seen terrible things in Korea, but nothing like this. I had to keep moving. The other two hunters might still be alive. That's when I heard screaming through the trees. I ran as fast as I could, following the sound. What I saw next still gives me nightmares. The second hunter was there, but something was terribly wrong with him. His eyes were completely white, and he was attacking the third hunter with his bare hands. Not like a normal fight, more like a wild animal. I shouted at him to stop, pulled out my revolver, but he didn't even seem to hear me. Before I could do anything, something huge moved in the shadows behind them. I'm talking huge, maybe 12 feet tall when it stood up. Its skin was gray and stretched tight like it was starving, but its body was powerful. And its eyes, they glowed like ice in the darkness. I fired my gun, but the creature moved faster than anything that size should. It grabbed the third hunter before I could stop it. I had to watch as it. I'm sorry, but some details are better left unsaid. I ran. For the first time in my life as a ranger, I ran. Back at the tower, I radioed for help. 2 rescue team members arrived a few hours later with a local guide. I tried to warn them, to make them wait until daylight, but they insisted on going out right away. That was a mistake. One of the rescue team members came back alone, walking strange, just like that second hunter. His partner was dead, he killed him himself. The local guide tried to run, but we found him later, frozen so cold he shattered like glass when he fell. The worst part? I was starting to feel it too, this horrible gnawing hunger that didn't feel natural. My brother's compass, which had never failed me before, was spinning wildly in my pocket. And the temperature, it just kept dropping. Something was hunting us, picking us off one by one, and we were trapped on that mountain with it. I made it back to the fire tower just as the worst blizzard I'd ever seen hit us. The wind was howling so loud it sounded like screaming, and the snow was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. The temperature gauge read -40°4 F, colder than I'd ever seen it up here. Inside the tower, I tried the radio again and again. Nothing but static. Then, through the static, I heard something that made my blood run cold, my brother's voice. But that was impossible. My brother died in Korea 10 years ago. "Jimmy, help me. I'm hurt, Jimmy. Come outside." I gripped his silver compass tightly. The voice sounded exactly like him, but I knew it couldn't be real. The creature was out there, trying to trick me. I'd seen what it could do to people's minds. That's when I noticed the frost on the windows forming strange symbols, the same ones I'd seen carved in the trees. The whole tower was creaking in the wind, and shadows seemed to move on their own. Time felt wrong somehow, like hours were passing in minutes. Then I heard it climbing the tower. Thump, 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 asterisk. Each step made the whole structure shake. I could hear its claws scraping against the metal. It was coming for me, and I was trapped 60 feet in the air. The backup team I'd radioed for earlier arrived just then. I could hear their vehicles below. But the blizzard was so bad they got separated right away. I could hear their screams as the creature found them, one by one. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just hide in the tower and listen to more people die. But what could I do against something that powerful? That's when I remembered what the local tribes had said about their legends, about spirits fearing pure silver and fire. I looked at my brother's compass, then at the emergency flares and fuel cans in the corner. I had one chance, but it meant destroying my tower, my home for the past 15 years. The creature was almost at the top now. I could see its long fingers curling around the railings, and its breath frosted the windows instantly. I had to act fast. I knew I had just seconds to act. I grabbed the fuel cans and started splashing them everywhere. My hands were shaking, but I kept going. The creature was right outside now. I could see its terrible face through the frosted windows, those hungry white eyes staring right at me. The door burst open with a crash. There it stood, filling the whole doorway, its gray skin stretched over bones, looking like death itself. The cold that came off it was worse than any winter I'd ever felt. It spoke with my brother's voice again, but this time I was ready. "Come here, Jimmy. I missed you." "You're not my brother?" I said, and threw the last fuel can at it. Then I lit the flare. The whole tower went up in flames faster than I expected. The creature screamed, not like an animal, but like something from another world. It charged at me, and I had nowhere to run except up. I climbed to the observation deck, the flames following us both. That's where we fought. Me, an old ranger with a silver compass and a flare gun, against this ancient, hungry thing. The tower was burning beneath us, metal groaning, ready to collapse. I could feel the hunger it was trying to push into my mind, but I fought it off. It grabbed me with those long fingers, cold as death. But I had my brother's compass in my hand. When I pressed that silver against its skin, it shrieked and let go. Then the floor gave way. We fell 3 stories, crashing through burning wood and hot metal. I landed in the deep snow, which probably saved my life. The creature landed too, but it wasn't done. Even with the flames all around us, it came at me one last time. I had 1 flare left in my gun. The creature was right on top of me, its face inches from mine, when I pressed my brother's compass against its chest and fired the flare right into it. The sound it made, I'll never forget it. The thing burst into flames, its body twisting and changing until it just disappeared. The blizzard stopped almost instantly, like someone had turned off a switch. They found me the next morning, half frozen in the snow. The fire tower was nothing but twisted black metal. Only one other person survived that night, a young rescue team member who hasn't spoken a word since. The doctor said I was lucky to only lose 3 fingers to frostbite. But the real scars aren't the ones you can see. The Forest Service classified everything about what happened. They said it was just a tragic accident, wild animal attacks and bad weather. But we all knew better. We never found most of the bodies. The local tribes came and did a cleansing ritual at the site. They said the Wendigo, that's what they called it, might be gone, but its hunger still lingers in those mountains. The tower was never rebuilt. People say it's cursed now. Every winter, when the snow gets deep and the wind howls through the trees, strange tracks appear in the high country. Big tracks, like something walking on 2 legs. I retired from ranger service after that. Couldn't bring myself to work the high country again. Some nights, when it's very quiet, I can still hear that thing speaking in my brother's voice. The only comfort I have is my brother's compass. It still works perfectly, even after everything it went through. These days, I live down in the valley. When people ask about the scar on my face, I tell them it's from Korea. When they ask about my missing fingers, I blame the cold. It's easier that way. Who'd believe the real story anyway? But every fall, just before the first snow, I look up at those mountains and remember. And I pray that whatever's up there stays up there, hungry and waiting in the high country. You know what's funny? I used to think I knew these mountains. Used to think I understood nature. But that night taught me something important. There are some things in this world we're not meant to understand. Some stories that should stay hidden in the dark. And if you're ever up in those mountains, and you hear something calling in a voice you know couldn't be there, run. Run as fast as you can, and don't look back. Because sometimes, the hunger is still watching. My name is Marcus Thompson, but most folks around here just call me Red. I've been a ranger at Gila National Forest for nearly 15 years now. And let me tell you about something that happened here that changed my life forever. It was the summer of 1975. and we were going through the worst heat wave anyone could remember. Before I tell you what happened, you should know a bit about me. I used to be a rodeo rider before I became a ranger. Got Apache blood running through my veins from my grandmother's side. She gave me this turquoise pendant I always wear, said it would protect me. Guess she was right about that, considering what I'm about to tell you. I've always been good at tracking animals, people, anything really. Growing up on the reservation taught me how to read the land like it was a book. These days, I walk with a bit of a limp from an old rodeo accident, but I can still ride a horse better than most folks around here. Devil's Canyon, that's where it all happened. It's this ancient volcanic canyon system, sitting about 6,500 feet up in the mountains. The local Apache people have always said there's something not right about that place. They tell stories about skin stealers, creatures that aren't quite human and aren't quite animal. I used to think those were just stories to keep kids from wandering too far. Boy, was I wrong. The canyon itself is something else. All twisted rock formations that sometimes look like faces when the sun hits them just right. Most days, it's full of normal sounds, birds chirping, wind whistling through the rocks, that sort of thing. But lately, things had been different. We'd been getting reports of mutilated cattle, and people would sometimes go missing. Never found a trace of them. I remember the exact day everything started, the 15th of July, 1975. The heat was so bad it felt like the air itself was on fire. That's when we got the call about a missing family, Mom, Dad, and 3 kids. They'd gone camping near Canyon Creek, and nobody had heard from them for 2 days. Little did I know, that call was about to lead me into the most terrifying experience of my life. When I got to the family's campsite, I knew right away something was terribly wrong. Their tent was ripped to shreds, like something had torn through it with huge claws. Their stuff was scattered everywhere, sleeping bags, clothes, food containers. But what really got to me was the silence. Usually this part of the canyon is full of bird sounds and crickets, but that day, nothing. It was as quiet as a graveyard. I've tracked bears and mountain lions all my life, but the tracks I found around that campsite, they were different. They looked kind of like wolf prints, but way bigger, and they had 3 toes instead of 4. Some were so deep in the ground that whatever made them must have been incredibly heavy. My police radio crackled, and Deputy Jim Watson's voice came through. He was bringing a search party to help look for the family. While I waited, I noticed something else strange. There were these rock carvings, like the old Indian petroglyphs, but these looked fresh. I'd been here just last week, and they definitely weren't there before. When Jim and the search party arrived, I split them into 3 groups. I took my tracking dog, Scout, with me. But something was wrong with him too. Scout was my best tracker, never scared of anything. But that day he kept whining and trying to pull back toward the trucks. We searched until sunset, and that's when we found the first body. It was the father, Mr. Martinez. I won't describe what they did to him. It's too horrible. But I will say this. It wasn't any normal animal attack. The cuts on his body were too clean, almost surgical. That night, we set up a base camp. Nobody wanted to leave with 1 body found and 4 people still missing. Jim sent 2 of his men, Mike and Steve, to check a small valley nearby. They had their radios and flashlights. We heard their screams about 20 minutes later. By the time we got there, all we found were their radios, some blood, and those same 3-toed tracks. But this time, something was different. The tracks showed that whatever these things were, they weren't just attacking randomly. They were hunting in a pattern, like they were smart, really smart. I think that's when I first started to realize that my grandmother's old stories about the skin stealers might not have been just stories after all. Things got worse over the next few days. We found Bill Cooper, a local rancher, scattered in pieces across the canyon. I'd known Bill for years. He was tough as nails and always carried a rifle. Whatever got him must have been incredibly strong and fast. The radio started acting weird too. Instead of normal chatter, we'd hear voices playing backwards, and sometimes what sounded like growling. At first, We thought it was just interference from the canyon walls, but then it got personal. We started hearing voices calling our names. My dog Scout, who'd been with me through everything, did something that still haunts me. One morning, he just ran full speed off a cliff. No warning, no reason, just ran straight off. I'd never seen an animal do anything like that before. It was like he'd seen something so terrible that death seemed better. Then my partner, Tom, found something that changed everything. He discovered an entrance to a cave system running under the canyon. The weird thing was, some of the tunnels looked man-made, with smooth walls and strange symbols carved into them. We also found an old Apache burial site down there. My grandmother had told me about such places, said they were sacred and shouldn't be disturbed. But what really got to me was when we found pieces of clothing scattered around. Not old clothes, but fresh ones. Some belonged to the missing Martinez family. Others we couldn't identify. There were claw marks everywhere, some of them fresh. That night, Tom went to check the cave entrance while I radioed for backup. He never came back. All I found was his flashlight, still on, pointing at a wall where something had written in what looked like blood. "Join us, Red." The creatures weren't just animals anymore. They were hunting us specifically, and they knew who we were. I could feel them watching us, always watching. Sometimes we'd catch glimpses, tall, dark shapes, moving impossibly fast between the rocks. They started showing up in daylight too, getting bolder. The worst part? They could talk. Not just mimic words like a parrot, but actually talk. We'd hear them at night, calling out in the voices of the people they'd taken, begging for help. But by then, we knew better than to answer those calls. It was on the 7th day when everything came to a head. I was tracking what I thought was a survivor's trail when I realized too late they'd led me right into a trap. I found myself deep in the canyon maze, with those things closing in from all sides. The summer heat was brutal, making mirages dance across the rocks. But these weren't mirages. I could see them clearly now. 7 feet tall when they stood up, looking like wolves but walking like men. Their leader was bigger than the others, with eyes that seemed almost human. They wore strips of clothing from their victims, which made them look even more terrifying. I remembered what my grandmother taught me about the canyon's underground water system. These creatures, whatever they were, couldn't cross running water. It was my only chance. I could hear the sound of the underground river below. I just had to find a way to reach it. They were smart, though. Really smart. They herded me toward the ancient burial cave, cutting off every escape route. I could hear them talking now, using different voices. Tom's voice, the Martinez kids' voices, even my own voice. They were playing with me. That's when something strange happened. Maybe it was my grandmother's pendant. Maybe it was the sacred burial ground, but the cave walls began to glow with a faint blue light. I saw shapes in the darkness, spirits of the ancient Apache warriors. My grandmother had told me about them. The alpha creature spoke to me then, in a voice that was like rocks grinding together. "Your people took our hunting grounds. Now we take everything back." I won't lie, I was terrified. But I also knew I was probably the only one who could stop them. I had my grandmother's teachings, my tracking skills, and most importantly, I knew the canyon better than they did. What happened next was like something out of a nightmare. The cave started shaking, rocks falling everywhere. The underground river burst through the walls, flooding the cave system. I could hear the creatures howling, not like wolves anymore, but something much worse. I managed to survive that night, but it came at a cost. Lost my left eye in the fight, and I still have nightmares about what happened in that cave. 3 of those creatures died in the cave-in and flooding, but 2 of them, including their leader, escaped. We found Tom 2 days later, alive, but different. He hasn't spoken a word since, just stares at the canyon walls and whimpers when the sun goes down. The official report says it was a case of wild animal attacks. The government folks came in, took a lot of pictures, asked a lot of questions, and then shut down that part of the canyon. Put up signs saying it's unsafe due to unstable rocks. But those of us who know the truth, we understand why it's really closed. I quit being a ranger after that. Moved back to the reservation and learned the old ways from our medicine men. My grandmother was right all along. There are things in this world that most people wouldn't believe, things that hide in the shadows of places like Devil's Canyon. Even now, 10 years later, we still hear stories. Ranchers find cattle cut up in that same surgical way. On full moon nights, people hear howls that don't sound quite like wolves. New claw marks appear on the canyon walls, and sometimes, if you're out there alone, you might hear someone calling your name in a voice that sounds familiar. The locals know better than to go near Devil's Canyon these days, but every now and then some tourists ignore the warning signs. Most come back with just a good hiking story. Some don't come back at all. As for me, I still wear my grandmother's turquoise pendant, still walk with a limp, and when I look at the canyon with my one good eye, sometimes I see those shapes moving in the shadows. They're still out there, watching, waiting, and sometimes, on very quiet nights, I can hear them talking, using the voices of people long gone. But that's not the scariest part. The scariest part is that lately, I've been seeing those same three-toed tracks showing up in other places, far from the canyon. It makes me wonder, are they spreading? Or were they always here, hiding among us, just waiting for the right time to come out of the shadows? I don't know the answer, but I do know one thing. If you're ever hiking in Gila National Forest and the birds stop singing, if you hear someone calling your name, or if you see tracks that look almost like wolf prints but not quite, don't stop to investigate. Just run. Run as fast as you can and pray they haven't already caught your scent. Because once they have, well, let's just say there's a reason why Devil's Canyon earned its name. My name is Daniel Patterson, but everyone around here calls me Buck. I've spent most of my life on these mountains, working as a ranger at Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest in Washington. Today, as I sit here trying to write down what happened last spring, my hands are shaking, not from the cold, but from the memories that still haunt me. I guess I should tell you a bit about myself first. I'm 45, and for the past 20 years, I've been the go-to guy for mountain rescues in the Pacific Northwest. See these missing fingers on my right hand? Lost them to frostbite during a rescue mission years ago, but that never stopped me from climbing. My wife Sarah used to joke that I was part mountain goat. God, I miss her laugh. We lost her in an avalanche 5 years ago, and the only thing I have left from her is this old Polaroid camera she gave me on our first anniversary. The locals here know me as the best climber around, though I never cared much for titles. What I do care about is keeping people safe on this mountain. But what happened this spring? Well, it changed everything I thought I knew about Mount Baker, about reality itself. It all started when that strange fog rolled in. Not your regular mountain mist, this was different. It moved wrong, like it had a mind of its own. And those ancient native burial grounds near the summit? The elders always warned us about something they called the fog eater. I used to think those were just stories to keep tourists from wandering too far. Now I know better. The day everything began, I was sitting in my ranger station, sipping my morning coffee and looking at the weather reports. That's when I got the call about 3 missing climbers. Little did I know, this wouldn't be like any rescue mission I'd done before. Little did I know, this would be the beginning of a nightmare that would change not just my life, but the very nature of Mount Baker itself. Let me tell you what really happened up there, in the mist. But I warn you, after hearing this story, you might never look at fog the same way again. That morning started like any other at the ranger station. I was looking through the missing climbers' details when Tom, one of our local guides, burst through the door. His face was white as snow. "Buck, you need to see this," he said, hands trembling as he pulled out his phone. The pictures he showed me made my stomach turn. They were taking photos of the sunrise on the glacier, but in every single picture, there was this tall, dark shape in the background. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but shadows don't move against the wind. and shadows definitely don't stand 15 feet tall. But that wasn't even the strangest part. Near the area where the climbers were last seen, we found their equipment, or what was left of it. Their metal climbing gear had melted into puddles, like ice cream on a hot summer day. And there were these huge claw marks in the solid rock, deeper than any animal I'd ever seen could make. "There's something else," Tom whispered, pointing to a nearby tree. It was twisted into a perfect spiral, like someone had wrung it out like a wet towel. All around it, dead birds lay scattered on the ground. They looked frozen, like they'd stopped mid-flight. The fog that day was unlike anything I'd seen in my 20 years on this mountain. It moved in thick waves, swirling against the wind in impossible patterns. My compass went crazy, spinning in circles, and my radio kept picking up static and strange whispers. I called in our best search team, 5 experienced climbers who knew these slopes like the back of their hands. As we geared up, I couldn't shake this feeling in my gut. Something was very, very wrong on Mount Baker. "We'll split into 2 groups," I told them, checking my gear one last time. "Stay in radio contact every 15 minutes, no exceptions." Before we headed out, I grabbed Sarah's old Polaroid camera. I don't know why, just a feeling I might need it. Looking back now, that camera saved more than just memories that day. None of us knew we were walking into a nightmare. None of us knew that by sunset, 2 of those 5 rescuers would vanish without a trace, and I would see things that would make me question everything I thought was real. The fog was waiting for us, and in that fog, something else was waiting too. We found the first missing climber about 2 hours into our search. I'll never forget that sight. He was just standing there, frozen like a statue, his face twisted in pure fear. When we touched him, his skin was cold as ice, but there wasn't any frost on him. It was like all the warmth had been sucked right out of his body. Just then, something happened that still gives me nightmares. Mike, one of our newest team members, was walking a few feet ahead when the fog suddenly got thicker around him. I heard him cough, then gasp. When I reached out to grab him, my hand went right through him, like he was made of smoke. In seconds, he just disappeared into the mist. We never found him. "Everyone, get close," I shouted, pulling out some rope to tie us together. That's when I saw it for the first time. In the fog, maybe 50 feet away, stood this massive shadow. It was tall, taller than any person I'd ever seen. The strange thing was, you could see right through it, like it was made of dark smoke. Wherever it moved, the air behind it turned to ice crystals. I grabbed Sarah's camera and took a quick photo. When the picture developed, my hands started shaking. The creature looked different in the photo, like it was halfway between our world and somewhere else. And behind it, I could swear I saw other versions of the mountain, like looking through broken glass. The radio crackled to life. "Buck?" It was Jerry from the other team. "Something's wrong with Lisa. She's aging, right in front of us. Her hair's turning gray, her skin." The radio went dead. The fog was getting thicker, and weird things started happening. My watch was running backwards. Some of us saw double, like there were copies of ourselves walking around. The air felt heavy, like time itself was getting twisted up. Then I heard it. A voice I thought I'd never hear again. "Buck?" It was Sarah's voice, coming from somewhere in the mist. My heart nearly stopped. I knew it couldn't be real. Sarah had died 5 years ago in that avalanche. But it sounded so real, so close. "Don't listen to it," Tom yelled, grabbing my arm. "It's trying to trick us." The shadow in the fog moved closer. With each step it took, reality seemed to bend around it. Trees appeared and disappeared. The ground under our feet shifted between solid rock and deep snow in seconds. We were no longer just looking for missing climbers. We were fighting something that shouldn't exist, something that was tearing apart the very fabric of our world, and we were running out of time. Everything went crazy after that. The fog got so thick I could barely see my own hands, and it started turning everything it touched into ice crystals. Beautiful, but terrifying. Like frozen lightning spreading across the ground. Tom pointed up at the sky, his voice shaking. "Buck, look!" A rescue helicopter was flying above us, searching for survivors. But as we watched, something impossible happened. The fog reached up like fingers and wrapped around it. In a blink, the helicopter just vanished. No explosion, no crash, just gone. That's when I started seeing them. Other versions of myself walking through the mist. Some looked younger, some older. One had all his fingers. Another was wearing the same jacket Sarah had given me the day she died. They were all me, but from different times, different lives maybe. "We need to get to higher ground," I shouted to what was left of our team. But as we climbed, things got stranger. I'd take a step and suddenly be in the same spot but in winter. Another step, and it was summer. Past and present were getting mixed up, like shuffling a deck of cards. The creature was herding us toward the summit, where the old native burial grounds were. Up there, we found something that changed everything, a circle of stones that seemed to glow from within. The fog swirled around it like water down a drain. "It's some kind of doorway," Tom whispered. But before he could say more, the fog grabbed him. I watched in horror as half of him just disappeared, like someone had erased part of him with an invisible eraser. The rest of him faded away, screaming. I was alone now, surrounded by versions of myself from different times. Sarah's voice kept calling from the fog, getting closer. Part of me wanted so badly to follow it, to see her one more time. But I knew that wasn't really her. The creature appeared right in front of me, bigger than ever. Through its shadowy form, I could see other mountains, other worlds. In my hand, Sarah's old Polaroid camera felt warm, almost alive. Somehow, I knew it was important. Somehow, I knew it was my only chance. But I had to make a choice, and fast. Reality was falling apart around me, and I was the only one left who could stop it. That's when I remembered something Sarah used to say. Sometimes a camera doesn't just capture moments, it captures truth. Looking through the camera's viewfinder, I could see what the creature really was. A tear in reality itself, like a rip in the fabric of our world. The creature lunged at me, but I kept taking pictures. Each flash seemed to hurt it, making it shrink back. In the photos that came out, I could see all the people it had taken, frozen in time, trapped between worlds. Mike, Tom, the missing climbers, even the helicopter crew, all of them caught in a place between places. Then I saw her, Sarah. She was there in one of the photos, just as beautiful as the day I lost her. She was reaching out, and for a moment, I could feel her hand on my arm, as real as anything. "Buck," her voice was clear now, not like an echo anymore. "You can't save everyone, but you can stop this." I understood then what I had to do. The camera wasn't just taking pictures. It was capturing pieces of the creature, trapping parts of it with each shot. But I was running out of film, and the creature was getting desperate. The ground cracked beneath my feet. The sky above showed different times of day all at once, sunrise, noon, and night swirling together. My other selves started disappearing one by one. Time was collapsing. I had one shot left. "This ends now," I shouted, raising the camera one last time. The creature rushed toward me, its shadowy form bigger than ever. I pressed the button just as it reached me. The flash was blinding. For a moment, everything stopped. The fog, the wind, time itself, all frozen. Then came the pull, strong, like being sucked into a tornado. The creature shrieked, the first sound I'd ever heard it make. Everything started getting pulled toward the camera, the fog, the creature, even parts of me. I felt myself being stretched, pulled, scattered across time. The last thing I saw was Sarah's smile in the swirling chaos. Then everything went white. I woke up 3 days later in the ranger station, but things weren't the same. They'll never be the same. The creature was gone, trapped forever in that last photo, which no one can find now. But stopping it came with a price. You see, I'm not quite normal anymore. Sometimes I'm in the present, but then I'll blink and suddenly I'm back there during the incident, or forward in time, or even back to the day I met Sarah. I can't control it. It's like I'm unstuck in time, drifting between moments like a leaf in the wind. They found most of the missing people. Some turned up in strange places. One climber was discovered in a cave that had been sealed for decades, not aged a day. The helicopter crew appeared 2 months later, thinking only an hour had passed. But some, like Tom, are still missing. The mountain is different now. They've closed it to climbers, put up warning signs and fences. The weather station up there keeps breaking. Their instruments show impossible things, like temperatures both freezing and boiling at the same time, or rain falling upward. The fog still comes sometimes. Not like before, but strange enough to make people nervous. Hikers say they see things in it, shadows, movements, pieces of other times. And sometimes, if you take a picture up there, you might catch something weird in the background. Maybe a person who wasn't there, or a building that doesn't exist anymore. As for me, well, the doctors can't explain what's wrong with me. How could they? Yesterday, I was giving my report to the Forest Service, and suddenly I was back on the mountain, watching the sunset with Sarah. An hour ago, I saw myself walking into this room, the me that will be here tomorrow. The only constant is this: in every time, in every moment I jump to, I still have Sarah's camera. It doesn't work anymore, not since that last photo. But I keep it with me, a reminder that some stories don't have neat endings, that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Because up there on Mount Baker, in the mist and shadows, something changed forever. Reality cracked a little that day, and through those cracks, something impossible slipped in. Or maybe it was there all along, just waiting for someone to notice. So if you're ever hiking near Mount Baker and the fog rolls in, thick and wrong and moving against the wind, don't stop to take pictures. Just turn around and walk away. Some things aren't meant to be captured, and some stories aren't meant to end. At least, that's what I tell people, when I'm here in their time. My name is William Henderson, but everyone calls me Will. I've been a ranger at Mammoth Cave National Park for almost 15 years now. With my PhD in geology and years of cave rescue experience, I thought I knew everything about these caves. Boy, was I wrong. I guess I should tell you about the craziest and scariest thing that ever happened to me down there. It was late fall of 1988, and something felt different about the cave that day. The air pressure was at a record low. We could feel it in our ears and bones. You might notice my white hair when you see me. No, it's not from old age. I'm only 39. It turned white after a cave accident a few years back. The same one that gave me this annoying limp. But that accident was nothing compared to what I'm about to tell you. I specialize in mapping unexplored caves, and I'm pretty good at it. I wear this special mining helmet I modified myself, added some powerful UV lights to it. Never thought those lights would end up saving my life. That morning started like any other. I was in my office, looking over some maps when Tommy, one of our junior rangers, burst through the door. His face was white as a sheet. "Will, we've got 6 spelunkers missing in the new passage," he said, breathing hard. "And that's not all. The seismic monitors are going crazy, and the bats, they're all flying out like something's chasing them." I grabbed my gear and helmet. Whatever was happening, I knew it wasn't normal. In all my years here, I'd never seen the bats behave like that. And 6 missing people? That's not just bad luck. That's something else entirely. As I headed to the cave entrance, I noticed the temperature reading on our monitors. It was rising, way faster than it should. Deep underground, cave temperatures usually stay pretty stable. This wasn't right, not right at all. Little did I know, I was about to discover something that would change everything we thought we knew about Mammoth Cave. Something that had been waiting in the darkness for a very, very long time. I gathered my rescue team quickly, 4 of our best cave experts. Before heading in, we checked our equipment one last time. My hands were shaking a little as I adjusted my helmet light. Something just felt wrong. The missing group went into the new passage about 6 hours ago, I told my team. They were supposed to check in every hour by radio, but we haven't heard from them since entered. As we walked deeper into the cave, our footsteps echoed off the walls. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Usually, you can hear water dripping, small creatures moving around, or the distant flutter of bats. But not today. The silence was heavy, like a thick blanket. About an hour in, we found something that made my blood run cold. On the cave wall were some old Native American paintings we'd never seen before. They showed strange, tall creatures hunting humans. The paintings were crude but clear enough to send chills down my spine. "Will, come look at this," called Sarah, our team's photographer. She was pointing her flashlight at the ground. Fresh claw marks scored the rock, unlike anything I'd seen before. They were huge, and they looked recent. Then we heard it, a sound that didn't belong in any cave, a low, humming vibration that we felt more than heard. It made my teeth ache and my stomach turn. "Everyone, stay close," I whispered, though I'm not sure why I whispered. Maybe because it felt like something was listening. We found the first sign of the missing group a few minutes later, a backpack torn to shreds, its contents scattered across the rocky floor. Next to it was a camera, still intact. When we checked the last photos taken, what we saw made no sense. The final image was blurry, but you could make out something tall and pale moving in the background. "Maybe we should call for backup," suggested Mike, our newest team member. His voice was shaking. Before I could answer, we heard a scream echoing through the tunnels. It sounded distant, but in caves, sound can be tricky. It could have come from anywhere. We had a choice to make: go back and wait for help, or push forward and try to save whoever was still alive down there. As team leader, the decision was mine, and I knew we didn't have time to waste. "We keep going," I said, checking my lights one more time. "But stay together. Whatever's down here, we face it as a team." I didn't know it then, but that decision would lead us into the darkest hours of our lives and to a discovery that would haunt me forever. We followed the screams deeper into the cave. Our lights bounced off the wet walls, creating scary shadows that seemed to move. The air was getting warmer, way warmer than it should be this deep underground. Then we found the first body. I'll never forget it. One of the missing spelunkers was wrapped up in something that looked like white silk stuck to the cave wall. Like a spider's cocoon, but much bigger. When we got closer, we could see he wasn't breathing. "Oh God," Sarah whispered, her hand covering her mouth. Just then, Mike slipped on something. His flashlight beam showed the ground was covered in some kind of clear liquid. Before any of us could warn him, smoke started rising from his boots. The stuff was eating through his gear like acid. "Get back!" I yelled, pulling Mike away. "Everyone, stay on the dry rocks!" That's when we heard it, a scratching sound coming from above us. Our lights showed nothing but darkness up there, but the sound was getting closer. "Switch to UV lights," I ordered, remembering my special helmet. As soon as we did, we saw them. They were on the ceiling, 3 of them. Tall, white creatures that looked almost human, but wrong in every way. They were clinging to the rock like lizards, their blind eyes just empty white orbs. When our UV lights hit them, they made this horrible shrieking sound and pulled back into the shadows. "Run!" I shouted. But these things were fast, really fast. We lost Tom first. These creatures grabbed him so quick we barely had time to react. Sarah screamed as he disappeared into a dark tunnel above us. Then we heard splashing. One of them had forced Jack into an underground lake. He never came back up. Mike, Sarah, and I ran through the tunnels, our hearts pounding. We could hear them following us, their claws scraping on the rock. They were playing with us, like cats with mice. We ended up in this huge chamber filled with old human bones. That's when we realized these things had been down here for a very long time, and we weren't their first visitors. The UV lights, I gasped between breaths. They don't like the UV lights. We need to. Before I could finish, the ground started shaking. Rocks were falling everywhere. Mike pushed Sarah out of the way of a falling boulder, but he wasn't quick enough to save himself. Now it was just Sarah and me, backed against a wall, surrounded by creatures that wanted to eat us. And the worst part? We could hear more of them coming. Sarah and I ran deeper into the cave, our UV lights the only thing keeping those creatures at bay. We found ourselves in a massive chamber I'd never seen before. The walls were covered in strange markings and what looked like ancient buildings carved right into the rock. "Will, look!" Sarah pointed at something that made my heart stop. There were hundreds of those creatures, all sleeping, hanging from the ceiling like bats. Some were starting to wake up. "They're not just hunting us," I whispered. "They're waking up from a really long sleep." Suddenly, the ground shook again. Parts of the ceiling started falling, and water began pouring in from somewhere above. The noise woke up more of the creatures. Sarah grabbed my arm. "The water, it's rising fast." She was right. The chamber was filling up, and the creatures were going crazy, climbing higher up the walls. That's when I noticed something. They were all moving away from one tunnel that sloped upward. "Sarah, that's our way out," I shouted over the noise of rushing water and screeching creatures. But as we ran toward it, one of the creatures dropped down right in front of us. In the UV light, I could see every detail of its horrible face. It reached for Sarah. I did the only thing I could think of. I threw my helmet at it, UV lights blazing. The creature screamed and fell back, its skin smoking where the light hit it. "Sarah, run!" I yelled. She made it to the tunnel, but I wasn't fast enough. My bad leg slowed me down, and I slipped on the wet rocks. The water was up to my chest now. Creatures were everywhere, but they stayed just out of reach of my backup UV light. I pulled out the emergency flares from my pack. If I was going down, I was taking these things with me. That's when I remembered something. My pack also had the explosive charges we sometimes use for clearing blocked passages. I had one chance. One crazy, desperate chance. With shaking hands, I grabbed the explosive charges from my pack. The water was now up to my neck, and I could hear those creatures getting closer. I had to act fast. "Sarah!" I shouted up the tunnel. "Get as far back as you can. I'm going to blow the passage." I stuck the charges to the walls where the tunnel narrowed. The creatures seemed to know something was wrong. They were getting more aggressive, moving closer despite my UV light. Just as I set the last charge, my backup UV light started flickering. The batteries were dying. The creatures knew it too. They started moving in. I pulled myself up into the tunnel, my wet clothes weighing me down. My bad leg was screaming in pain. I could feel their cold hands grabbing at my boots. When I was about 50 feet up the tunnel, I hit the detonator. The explosion was so loud, it felt like my head would split open. The whole cave shook. Rocks started falling everywhere. The creatures' screams were horrible, like nothing I'd ever heard before. I crawled as fast as I could, rocks falling all around me. The tunnel behind me was collapsing, but I could see a light ahead. Sarah was there, reaching out for me. Just as her hand grabbed mine, the biggest creature I'd seen yet lunged up from below. Its claws caught my leg, ripping through my pants. The pain was terrible. Sarah pulled harder. I kicked with my good leg, catching the creature right in the face with my boot. It let go, and we both watched as it fell back into the darkness, just as the tunnel completely collapsed. We made it out, but something wasn't right with my eyes. The cave lights were so bright they hurt. The doctors later said the creature's subsonic screams had damaged something in my eyes. I can't go into caves anymore. They're too dark for me to see anything now. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I can still feel those vibrations. And lately, there have been reports of new cave openings appearing in strange places. The government took all our reports and sealed them away. They closed off many parts of the cave system, but that was 3 months ago. I can't work as a cave ranger anymore, but I still help from the surface. I spend most of my time mapping new cave openings that keep appearing. Something doesn't feel right about them. Last week, Sarah called me in the middle of the night. Her voice was shaking. "Will," she said, "the seismic monitors, they're showing movement again, deep down." and it's not normal cave activity. I've been collecting newspaper clippings too. 3 hikers went missing near a new cave opening in Tennessee. They found their camera. The last photo shows something tall and white in the background, just like before. The government people are still here, pretending to do geological surveys. But I see them bringing in weird equipment at night. Sometimes I hear them talking about containment and specimens. Yesterday, a little boy told the local newspaper he heard strange humming sounds coming from his basement. His house is built on limestone, the same kind that makes up Mammoth Cave. The worst part? My UV light equipment that I keep at home. It started flickering last night, for no reason, and I swear I heard scratching sounds coming from underneath my floor. I think we didn't stop them. We just made them angry, and now they're finding new ways out. Sarah and I are the only ones left who know the whole truth. We're keeping track of every new cave opening, every missing person report, every strange sound people hear at night. Because we know what's down there. We know they're still hunting. And I have this terrible feeling that what we saw was just the beginning. Sometimes at night, when everything is quiet, I press my ear to the ground. And you know what? The humming is getting louder. They're coming back. And this time, they won't be trapped in just one cave system. My name is Michael Reynolds, but most people know me as Iron Mike. After 20 years in the Marine Force Recon, I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened in the Allegheny National Forest during that blood moon winter of 1995 still haunts me every night. I've been a forest ranger here for the past 5 years. It's usually a peaceful job, helping lost hikers, checking on wildlife, and making sure campers don't start fires where they shouldn't. The tall pines have always been my friends. They're gentle, swaying in the wind, like a calm dance that helped heal my war memories. That was until everything changed. It started with a simple radio call about a missing logging crew. 7 men, all experienced workers, disappeared without a trace. At first, I thought it was just another rescue mission. You know, maybe they got lost or someone got hurt. But when I reached their camp, I knew something was terribly wrong. Their equipment was scattered everywhere, like something had torn through their heavy machinery like it was made of paper. Their chainsaws, these huge, powerful tools, were twisted into shapes that shouldn't be possible. But what really made my skin crawl were the strange symbols carved deep into the surrounding trees. They weren't made by any tool I'd ever seen. Using my prosthetic leg never bothered me before, a souvenir from my last mission in the Marines. But that day, as I stood there looking at those symbols, the metal and plastic felt ice cold against my skin. The forest was different too. Usually, you'd hear birds singing, squirrels chattering, or leaves rustling. But that day, nothing. Just a silence so deep it made my ears ring. I reached for my Kabar knife, the same one I'd carried through every mission in the Marines. Each notch on its handle tells a story of survival, but something told me I was about to add a few more. Little did I know, this wasn't going to be just another search and rescue. I was about to face something that no military training could have prepared me for. As I walked deeper into the forest, something felt off. The trees, I've known these pines for years, could navigate through them blindfolded, but now they seemed different. I pulled out my map and compass, basic ranger tools I'd used thousands of times. But the compass needle just spun wildly, like it was dancing to some crazy tune. That's when I noticed the trees weren't where they should be. Control, this is Ranger Reynolds. I spoke into my radio. Nothing but static answered back. Great. I found the first real clue near an old logging road, fresh boot prints in the mud, heading towards some ancient Native American burial mounds. But they just stopped suddenly, like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. Next to the last footprint was something that made my blood run cold, a perfect circle of dead animals. Rabbits, squirrels, even a young deer, all laid out, like someone had carefully placed them there. The sun was setting now, painting the forest in deep shadows. I'd have to set up camp soon, but every instinct screamed at me to get out. 25 years of military and ranger experience told me this wasn't normal. I've tracked bears, dealt with mountain lions, handled all sorts of wilderness emergencies. This was something else. I found a clearing to set up camp near one of the old abandoned logging cabins. As I was gathering firewood, I saw it, a massive pine tree, easily hundreds of years old, completely uprooted. Not blown over by wind or struck by lightning. It looked like something had pulled it up from underground and moved it. The root system was intact, impossible for a tree this size. That night, as I sat by my campfire, I heard it for the first time, a sound like whispers coming from the trees. Not wind in the branches. I know that sound. This was different. Like voices having a conversation just quiet enough that you can't make out the words. I gripped my kabar knife tighter and watched the shadows dance between the trees. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every few hours I could swear the trees around my camp had shifted positions, and that whisper, it never stopped. By morning, I knew I wasn't just looking for missing loggers anymore. I was hunting something. Or maybe it was hunting me. The next morning, I found the first body. I wish I could forget what I saw. Tom Miller, one of the loggers, was somehow merged with a tree trunk. It was like the tree had grown around him overnight, his face frozen in terror, half buried in the bark. I've seen some horrible things in combat, but this was different. I radioed for backup, and surprisingly, it worked this time. Within hours, a search party arrived, 2 state police officers, a forest biologist named Dr. Sarah Chen, and 3 local hunters who knew these woods well. They didn't believe me at first about the trees moving. Nobody would. But they were about to learn the hard way. "Look at these patterns," Dr. Chen said, pointing at the ground. The trees were arranged in perfect circles and triangles, not natural at all. As she was taking photos, something strange started happening. A weird mist began rising from the ground, smelling sweet but making us dizzy. That's when we lost the first search party member. Jim, one of the hunters, walked a few steps ahead of us. Suddenly, vines, moving faster than any plant should, wrapped around his legs. We tried to help, but they pulled him into the undergrowth in seconds. His screams, I still hear them in my nightmares. Officer Martinez pulled his gun, firing at the vines. Bad move. The forest. It didn't like that. The trees around us started creaking, their branches bending in ways that branches shouldn't. We ran, but Officer Collins tripped. When we turned back, he was changing, his skin turning bark-like, branches growing from his fingers. He begged us to help him, but there was nothing we could do. Dr. Chen was recording everything on her camera, her hands shaking. "This is impossible," she kept saying. "Plants don't behave like this." Then we saw it, rising between the trees, a massive shape, like a tree but wrong. It was tall, maybe 30 feet, moving like it was made of living wood and shadows. I grabbed Dr. Chen's arm. "Run!" I shouted. But as we turned to escape, the ground beneath our feet began to move, turning soft like quicksand. The forest wasn't just alive, it was hungry. We got separated while running. Dr. Chen screamed somewhere behind me, but when I turned back, all I saw was a massive growth of mushrooms and vines where she had been standing. They were moving, pulsing like they were breathing. I couldn't help her. I had to keep moving. My military training kicked in. Stay calm. Assess the situation. Find high ground. I climbed onto a rocky outcrop, and that's when I saw the full horror of what was happening. The entire forest was alive, really alive. Trees were slowly walking on their roots, forming circles like they were hunting. The ground rippled like waves in a pond. I found an old ranger station and broke in, looking for anything useful. Inside, I discovered something important, a dusty file from the 1920s. It told about similar disappearances and warnings from local Native Americans about an ancient forest spirit that woke up during blood moons to feed. The file mentioned something else. The spirit feared fire and iron. That's when I remembered my kabar knife, how the trees seemed to lean away from it. I had a plan, but I needed to work fast. Night was coming, and with it, the blood moon would rise. Using my lighter and some gas I found in the station, I started making torches. The forest didn't like that. The windows rattled, and branches started scratching at the walls. Through the window, I saw something that made my heart stop. Copies of that tree creature were forming. 1 became 2, 2 became 4. The forest wasn't just hunting anymore. It was building an army. The station's radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard voices. Not human voices, but something trying to sound human. They whispered my name, over and over. The walls started to crack as roots pushed through them. I gripped my knife tighter and checked my makeshift torches. If I was going down, I was going down fighting. Then I saw it through the window. The biggest tree I'd ever seen, glowing with a strange red light. It had to be the heart tree, the source of all this. If I could reach it, maybe I could end this nightmare. But first, I had to get past an army of walking trees that wanted to turn me into fertilizer. I knew I had only one chance. With my torches ready and my K-bar knife at my belt, I made a run for it. The forest came alive around me. Branches tried to grab me, roots rose up to trip me, but my years of military training kept me going. My prosthetic legs sank into the soft ground with each step, but I didn't stop. The tree creatures were everywhere now. They looked like people made of bark and branches, reaching for me with their long wooden fingers. I swung my torches in wide arcs, and they backed away from the flames, shrieking like wind through dead trees. As I got closer to the heart tree, things got worse. The air filled with strange spores that made my head spin. I started seeing things, the faces of the people we'd lost, growing out of tree trunks, calling my name. But I knew they weren't real. I had to focus. Finally, I reached the heart tree. It was massive, pulsing with an evil red glow that matched the blood moon above. Inside its transparent bark, I could see the shadows of all the people it had taken over the years. The sight made me sick. The tree tried to fight back. Its branches shot down like spears, but I rolled and dodged, thanks to all those years of combat training. When I got close enough, I struck with my K-bar knife, cutting deep into its bark. The whole forest screamed, not just the heart tree, but every tree around me. I pulled out my last torch and threw it at the base of the heart tree. The fire caught quickly, spreading up its trunk. The tree thrashed and tried to put out the flames, but it was too late. As it burned, all the other tree creatures started falling apart. But the forest had one last trick. As the heart tree died, it released all its spores at once. I tried not to breathe them in, but some got through. That's when everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital. They found me at the edge of the forest, covered in ash and dirt. The official report said a forest fire had destroyed several acres, but no one could explain why the burn pattern was a perfect circle, or why some trees looked like they'd been moved. The missing people were never found. The families still hope for answers, but I know the truth. The forest took them. The authorities declared the area a hazardous zone and closed it off. They blamed toxic chemicals from old logging operations, but I know better. It's been 30 years since that night, but the nightmares haven't stopped. Sometimes I wake up hearing those whispers, the sound of trees talking. My hair turned completely gray within a month after the incident. The doctors say it was stress, but how do you explain to them that part of the forest is still inside me? I retired from the ranger service after that. My prosthetic leg still gets ice cold whenever I'm near trees. But the worst part? I've been watching the news. Every few years, during the blood moon, people go missing in forests across the country. Always the same pattern. Equipment torn apart. Strange symbols. Trees in geometric shapes. Last week, I drove past the Allegheny forest. The trees have grown back where the fire was, but they're different somehow. Taller, darker, and I swear, as I passed by, they all turned slightly, like they were watching me, like they remembered me. The heart tree might be gone, but something tells me there are more out there. Ancient things living in old forests, waiting for the right moment to wake up. So let me give you some advice. If you're ever in the woods and everything goes quiet, if the trees don't look quite right, or if you hear whispers in the wind, run. Run as fast as you can. Because sometimes the monsters aren't hiding in the forest. Sometimes the forest is the monster.